Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today in such a special day. Finally, I think that the summer is upon us. And for this incredible event that we have today, the opening of the Sean Scully, the Albee Barn in Montauk, it's truly a remarkable exhibition. It's a very special exhibition because it took a village. It took, first of all, for Sean to bring this project to us, to the parish. He wanted to see the Montauk series be displayed for the first time together in Long Island, in the space that inspired, the space, the light, and the nature that inspired that series of work. And so it is a labor of love, first and foremost from Sean and his team, and also the museum staff and the donors. It's a show that we were able to deliver everything that we envisioned for the exhibition. And we had a pool of donors that I'm going to acknowledge right now that gave us the resources that we needed to really deliver this caliber of exhibition. So Sean Scully, the Albee Barn Montauk, is presented with the absolute generous support of Northern Trust, Kenneth C. Griffin, and Fiona and Eric Rudin. Thank you so much. That support was instrumental. Thank you. We are also incredibly grateful for the support of Lisan Gallery, who worked through us, through the whole process with us, Michael Hilty, Catherine Bill Carmody, who are parish trustees, Susan and Timothy Davis, who are also parish trustees, as well as Janina Fuertes. We're also very grateful to Linda Hackett and Melinda Hackett from the Call Foundation, Amy and Stephen Horowitz and their daughter, who are here today, also with all your kids are here, yes. Also parish trustees, Sandy and Stephen Perlbinder, also with their daughter, who are also trustees. Steve Pesner, who actually helped sponsor the talk today in memory of his wife, Michelle Pesner, who would have actually been here today sitting at the front row. Michelle Pesner, Jennifer Rice and Michael Foreman, thank you so much. Herman Goldman Foundation, Marty McClanahan, also a parish trustee. Lauren and Stephen Schwartz, thank you so much. Robin and Frederick Siegel, trustees at the parish, as well as Alexandra Stanton and Sam Natafov, thank you so much. And Cedric Ward also helped us fund the exhibition. It took a village, but I am very proud of what we delivered today. And I want to thank you, everyone that helped us bring this museum to the next level and deliver this caliber of exhibition that's going to be on view until September. So I hope we have a lot of visits from you and a lot of your friends. It is my pleasure today to thank Northern Trust. Thank you, Carlos Arrizurrieta, for Northern Trust for being here. Vast last name. So thank you so much. And I want to invite Jenny Smith, also from Northern Trust. She is the Senior Managing Director, and she's going to give us a few remarks before we start the show. Jenny, do you want to join me, please? Thank you.
Monica, thank you for your kind introduction and your dedication in bringing this important exhibition to the parish. On behalf of my colleagues at Northern Trust, I want to say how honored we are to serve as the presenting sponsor of Sean Scully, the Albee Barn Montauk. We're so thrilled to be joined this evening by the artist himself, Sean Scully. Sean, this meaningful body of work that we've had the privilege of experiencing here this evening is a beautiful representation of your profound connection to Long Island. Additionally, it underscores the power of nature and, in turn, art to transform and inspire. At Northern Trust, we too believe in the transformative power of art. We've been a strong supporter of the arts and culture in the communities we serve since our founding in Chicago in 1889. Over the last 10 years, we've donated over $240 million to charitable causes worldwide, approximately $85 million of which have been designated to arts and cultural institutions. We're honored to continue our commitment through our sponsorship of this important exhibition at the parish. Joining me this evening is my colleague, Carlos Arrizurrieta, the President of Wealth Management for the Northeast region. Carly and I look forward to meeting many of you tonight. Thank you all, and I'll hand the mic back to Monica.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And special thank you to anyone that's sponsoring the arts this day. We're living through somewhat of a crisis, so thank you so much. And now, Sean May you join me on stage? It's while Sean gets here, I have to tell you that folks have been asking us, what are you going to talk about? And we are going to play it by ear because we have so much to talk about. We didn't want to structure it. So it's going to be a surprise for all of us, our conversation, but it will be a lot of fun and very meaningful.
Mine is working.
Okay, good. We're there. We're halfway there then. Sean, we're starting with a photo of the photo mural that we have in the gallery, the Montauk series. We did this show, Sean, because you approached us at some point during COVID and saying, I have this idea. I have this series of paintings that are dear to me, and I would actually like to show them, at the parish because that's where they need to be gathered again. You've been buying some of those works back to you because they are special to you. They mean a lot. And they also incorporate several shifts in your body of work that have continued today. So I wanted to ask you to let us know a little bit more of what your feeling is towards those Montauk paintings. Why are they so important to you?
One of the big reasons, as I mentioned before, is that being out here, Long Island, put me in touch with nature again. I'd spent my whole life in the city. And when I came to New York, 1975, I basically had to work in construction and in other things in order to be able to make the paintings. So I didn't really have a chance to lift up my head and look around, and I don't really know all that much about my surrounding area either. And people would show me things sometimes, but very, very infrequently. I was mostly in the city, mostly downtown with all my art buddies. And we were never in the countryside. So coming out here put me in touch with the sense of nature and its materiality. And of course, on Long Island, you get it all. Because the island is so narrow, you've got the sea and the interior all the time, so it's changing rapidly. You don't have to make a long journey to get to the beach, for example. And I was going to the beach, walking along the beach, looking at all the stuff that washes up on the beach, which is incredibly interesting coloristically, like dark green seaweed, bleached out bones of fish, and so on. And obviously the color of the water. So you see the horizon line. Now in New York, Manhattan, I mean, you never see the horizon line. What you see is the edges of buildings. The other thing about Manhattan is that there are no spaces between the buildings. And this is super different from Europe. So Manhattan is a city of collisions and conflict. So when you come out here, the sense of the majesty of nature is very strong because you're right by the sea. So these paintings represent an ability to... you didn't hear everything I said before, right?
Many folks were not there, no.
Shall I just repeat everything?
Yes. Thank you.
No, I'm not going to do that.
I'll let you know later then. But
Thanks for the enthusiasm.
But you did mention that you found wood planks in the barn as you walked in, and that many of them you used for the paintings. That was a first thing that you had done.
Yeah, and so I found material that had had a previous life, which I like very much. And that's apart from conservation issues. But I like something that's had a history. So all the pieces of wood that were lying around were just ready to be used. Nobody else wanted them. And I started cutting them up, screwing them together, and making these little paintings. And while I was doing that, I was going into the city because, without wishing to be unkind to Long Island, does get a bit dull out by the out in Montauk. So I had to go in the city, I had to see some traffic. And so I would go into the city and work on Heart of Darkness, the big painting. So they were informing each other back and forth. Anyway, I've managed to find some of these little paintings and buy them back for myself to keep them. And if I hadn't, making this exhibition would be impossible.
Correct. You also mentioned that you started including different colors also, because once you had contact with nature, your color palette widened a little bit beyond what you had done in New York City.
Well, that brings up two issues. One is that I integrated myself into the art world of Manhattan by being a good immigrant. I learned English, and I learned minimalism. And minimalism in Manhattan was quite brutal. Very much concept-based, theory-based, and concrete-based. It wasn't phenomenological, in other words. And to translate that word for you all, it wasn't just how it looked. It wasn't what light effects it emanated from it. It was much tougher than that. So I dropped everything that I came with and entered a period of extreme severity for 5 years, where I made principally black and grey pinstripe paintings. And that was building a foundation from which I could springboard out. So it was that break, and then that break was assisted by the encounter with the sensual spectrum of Mother Nature, which is out here. So you see in the bigger painting that there's essentially black and white. So it's still somewhat theory-based. Whereas the smaller ones, I tended to be more relaxed in terms of what colors I would bring into the painting. So the sensory benefit of being here was significant in that sense, in the color sense.
Sean, also, you, if I am correct, you mentioned that you started including white as a color in your palette that wasn't that prevalent. It was blacks and grays.
Yeah, when I was working, let's say up to about 1980, and I started to fight my way out of minimalism, I began to use this white color, and it's true to say that I found the white color on the beaches of Long Island with all the bones that were there. And they were never pure white. They were always very distressed by the movement of the sea and the sand and so forth. And this was super interesting to me. And once I started to paint loosely, the possibilities of nuance became stronger. And so this is another word that got bigger, I would say, around this time for me. The issue of nuance on a massive scale. As I returned to New York, and these are not, of course, exemplified by the smaller things, but this combination of the poetic or the delicate or the nuanced or the complex emotionally on a monumental scale was extremely interesting to me.
Before you get to the shift of that, I just want to discuss one more thing about the Montauk paintings, which is that you name them after islands. And so given that the scale is a little bit smaller and they're more three-dimensional, they're a little bit more protruding from the wall, you mentioned that it made sense to name them after islands in Long Island.
Yeah, for a very simple reason, which is that an island is in the middle of the ocean. So the relationship between the island and what's around it is exaggerated in relation, let's say, to other land masses. And I thought the same applied to these small paintings. They look like islands on the wall. If one imagines the space as the ocean, then the small painting looked like an island because it was compressed in scale. And I thought that was very appropriate. So I started to choose the names of islands around Long Island, like Ridge, Swan, Plum, so on.
I'm just going to give a couple of more.
And I remember painting Plum on two separate occasions, which is right there. And it was painted at different times of the day. And the pale or the bright area was painted in the early part of the day when the light was fantastically difficult in the barn. You know, it was blasting everything. And then the next day, I painted the little inset in the late afternoon. So there it is. It's almost like a diary or a landscape.
Right.
Very close to being a landscape.
Right. There's one painting that you describe as having gone on your bike and have the sun hit you in the back of your neck. And you describe your neck as being really red and really orange, and then going back into painting one of these with that sense of like the sun actually hitting your skin.
That's Ridge.
That's Ridge.
Same thing happened with Ridge. So I painted the blue area when it was cooler. So I painted just how I felt, what temperature I was in. Now the painting Ridge was a different shape. And this is very interesting in how I was making them, because the little painting Ridge, which is there, was orange and dark red, horizontal bands. And at a certain point, I added another little square, which I screwed to the painting that was already, I thought, finished. And then I decided to put the blue and white bands on it after a trip to the beach. where I saw blue and white. And then I came back and painted blue and white. So they're just little portraits, I guess, of my moving around near the barn. I didn't go very far, of course. Took the shortest route down to the beach and then back on the bike. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to stick that on the painting and then have dinner, get drunk.
But but it was a very, we're going to look at into now. It was a very different way of painting for you, I gather, from being in the New York studio, coming here and then going back to the New York studio to a massive studio of 4,000 square feet after doing those smaller paintings.
Well, you know, after minimalism had a divorce with itself, I had to find a way forward. So the tautology and reductiveness that minimalism is based on had to be broken with intuition and breaking of a logic, so that the proportions in the paintings weren't based on mathematics, but they were based on feeling. And that changes everything. So that opens up many possibilities. Of course, it opens up possibilities for catastrophe as well. Because I'd had the security of these long conversations, that we used to have about where something was placed in a old fire station in the corner. You'd go in a fire station, there'd be a brick with some paint on it in the corner. That was it. And then to bring in issues of body, nature, music, metaphor, and above all, relationship after a decade of non-relational, high-minded abstraction was quite a business.
You mentioned sometimes that you wanted to bring back narrative.
I did.
And that allows a lot of metaphors with music. Like you talk a lot about music when you talk about your paintings also, and improvisation and rhythm and harmony or breaking thereof.
Well, that brings up an interesting issue, because my geometry is not really about order. It's more about rhythm. So my paintings have a lot of repetition in them and a lot of changes of rhythm in relation to each other. And that, of course, is very musical. And I come from a musical background. So, no, I mean, my family was musical. I'm not talking about me. But I inherited this interest in music, or the need for music, the need for rhythm. So my geometry is different from, let's say, the geometry of placement, because it's a geometry that constantly rejigs itself in terms of whether it evokes note or chord, and whether it evokes slow or faster rhythm.
Sean, in works like the Wall of Light, where there's a physical reference, how do you bring these, the musical compositional scheme and methodology? Do they come together, or are there different methodologies when you approach your geometry? Like the source of inspiration can be music, or can be an actual place, a wall of built stones that you saw in Mexico, or they all come together when you're in front of the canvas or the paper?
Yeah, I don't don't really think about it like that. I work. I'm a believer in work. I think work produces a moment of inspiration, a moment of revelation, but I think it has to be earned. So, I don't wait until I get all, giddy and then I start working. So I work, and then out of work, something comes. But the work has to become first. It has to dominate everything in the studio. And doesn't mean to say that I don't do something out of inspiration, but I do believe in work. Also, I have the music in me. It's not something that I have to pull out. I mean, I lived that, and when I was young, I lived that. So, I lived that in my family. So that's part of me. And there's another thing that's fundamental to all this, and that is the influence on my work of my existentially affecting trip to Morocco. And my great interest in rugs, weaving, and a completely different tradition from the suprematist tradition that we have in the West, and I've been very attracted to other cultures, and they are pulled into my work. And I have a big collection of rugs. I'm very interested in rugs and the way they're made. I love the idea that a line ends up as a mass, or as a body. That's fascinating to me. So that kind of influence is very strong in my work. So my work is a combination of world culture. I don't just come out of the School of New York or the School of Paris. As there are other things that I pulled in.
Which is fantastic, because I grew up in Mexico City, and I've seen those walls of massive rocks that we have in the pyramids or around Mexico City.
Yeah.
And I had never seen them as walls of light until, I actually saw them that way through your work. This ability to abstract and then return to us something very poetic from reality, which is really remarkable.
Well, it's a question of where one has been and how one grew up, and where one has traveled to, and what you bring to your work through all this. And as you know, I am very connected to Mexico. I've been there many times, and I speak Spanish because I fell in love with Mexico. And I went down to Mexico actually by mistake, because I wanted to go to Cartagena.
In Colombia.
I wanted to go to Cartagena because it was a pirate town, and I think of myself a bit like a pirate. So I thought, I think I'll go to Cartagena, but the trip to Cartagena was cancelled, and then I saw a town in Mexico that was called Iztapa. And it's spelled with an X, Iztapa. And I thought it was called X-Tapa, because I didn't speak any Spanish. So I go to this place, and it's a hotel. It's not a town.
It's a
but
resort.
it was near a town. And then this guy, he was actually a Canadian guy who had moved to Mexico, and he was giving car rides to old pyramids. And when I saw these pyramids, I went kind of crazy, because the density of it and the mysticism of it, which is not my religion, of course, affected me greatly. And then, of course, I started to learn Spanish, because that's when I fell in love with it. And I wanted to, in a way, eat that culture. And it affected my work a lot, I think. You know, the way that these pyramids stand, and they don't give up their secrets. And that's fascinating, because, you know, we live in an age where everything gives itself up and everything gets worn out. But when something doesn't give everything up, it can't get worn out. Or as Einstein said, when I know something, I don't have to think about it anymore, which is one of my favorite remarks. I thought, when I heard that, I thought about it again and again.
Sean, and from these massive, heavy, grounding constructions of the Mexican pyramids to the landlines, to this photo that we have in the show, and your series of landlines, which is almost the opposite spatial feeling, right? These pyramids are like compact and dense and solid and grounding with all this texture. And then you go into these landlines, which is almost the opposite sense of space and ephemeral. And the borders are not as clear as those rocks and those, you know, sediments that we have. And then you create this whole body of work, landlines. Is the feeling when you're doing them, you moved into more of a horizontal kind of composition and line. Is that a different attitude? Was it more expansive, and then the brushstroke got bigger and wider and more expressive and more fluid, or
Well, yeah, they give up something.
they give up these ones?
They give up a certain structure. So they give up the stress between the structure and how you make it unstable. So there's always this conflict in my work. How to humanize this structure and how to make it in some way elastic, so you can work with it and as feeling, as well as work with it as a architectonic structure. But when you give the vertical up and you're just left with horizontals, you're in direct relationship with landscape painting and sea painting, because they're basically a collection of horizons. So other things are then brought to bear on the situation. One of them is serialization, of course, and a lot of contemporary music that I'm interested in, and then of course a lot of romantic painting, like Courbet, for example. And now it's not so fantastic to me that I live right on the Hudson River. And the other thing I was thinking of is this, that we don't need to be more abstract, because abstraction takes us further away from nature. And this is enormous return to figuration is interesting to me in the sense that we are trying to reclaim our lost connection with nature. And that is part of my affection for these paintings and why I do them, because they make a clear attempt to show a love for nature, which of course if we don't exercise, we won't have anywhere to live.
Correct.
So the job of art changes, and the job of that kind of painting for me now is to evoke nature and make the relationship between the kind of abstract-ish painting that I do and nature much stronger than it was, say, 50 years ago.
Thank you, Sean. I wanted to ask you about these digital drawings now. Do you do them while you're every day? They're also like a diary that you do them on your iPad. You do them while you're waiting online, commuting. You know, the interface being an iPad. Does that make it more transient? Like you're on the road, you know, drawing, or is a practice where you sit down in your studio and you draw with your iPad as opposed to the canvas?
I don't have an iPad. I have an iPhone.
Oh, they're in the iPhone. They're not.
Yeah, they're in the iPhone, the one that is in my pocket. And I don't have a program. I do them in notes.
A lot of us have notes on our phones, and we don't get to manage these.
And I do them on maybe on a plane or on a train. And yeah, I do them like that now and again. And I like doing them. I do them with my finger like this, and then fill them in. And I never expected to print them, but you know, I do this kind of thing a lot with Faye, you know, who helps me with projects.
Faye, studio manager.
Yes.
Faye, thank you, Faye. Look at these.
And then she is in dialogue with this photographer guy we know, and then he prints them, finds ways to print them, interesting ways to print them, and I like it as a wall because it looks like my head. You know, that's what's going in my
Fantastic.
head.
Yes.
Terrible. So,
Sean, let's talk about Tower. Do you feel like talking about Tower?
well, this is new, and it comes from a project that some people were trying to organize that I think did not come to fruition, which was about 9/11. And in fact, I was a member of the swimming club in the World Trade Center. I can't swim, but, you know, it takes me forever to get from one end to the pool to the other. So it's an extremely good workout because I have absolutely no technique. But anyway, I joined the swimming club, and it was on the 26th floor. But on that day, I was not in the World Trade Center. So somebody said, we'd like to make an exhibition about this. And that started me thinking about towers and towers with holes in. I was also thinking about other things too, like Lucio Fontana, who punctured the surface to opened some mental idea of infinity. Very spiritual paintings. So I was thinking along these lines, you know, in a way, religiously, spiritually, and as a kind of catastrophe, and the impossibility of maintaining towers, what towers are. And I started to make these paintings. It took a long time to come to fruition. But what I did actually was make the drawings on the iPhone. And then I gave them to this guy who works for me, with me, you know, Jorge. And he loves to make the panels. So, okay, make the panels then, matey. He makes the panels, and then I paint them, and I have no clue what the order is. That's interesting to me. So they're broken control, which is a nice metaphor for a tower. And as I said before, a reassemble of a kind of cubist idea. So they have their origin, I think, in École de Paris, which is really big in my soul.
You included spray paint here also, to include like an urban component to the painting.
Yeah, but I put sprayed paintings in the 70s too, and in the 60s actually. 69, I think, was the first one where I used a spray gun, because it has this connection with the proletariat, with the street art. So these are interesting in the sense that they're not removing themselves from life. Mm-hmm. And that was always, in a way, my mission, to bring abstraction down into the street. Because I think it became very remote. You know, the story of abstraction is one of reduction and harmonious arrangement that only Clement Greenberg could know. You know, he would bless the painting as being because nobody else could know, because it was high taste. And this takes it further and further and further away from the people. And I'm a guy who grew up very poor, and I am extremely connected to the people. So I wanted to make abstraction, but I'm always trying to connect it.
And I think that's why it moves so many of us. I love that you're bringing back that narrative, and that every time it's like, you know, these feel like altarpieces, or that we can make those references to real life, and you acknowledge that back to us, right? So then there's no sense like, oh, I didn't get the paint, I won't say these because I'm sure. No, it's always like, yes, you know, it's something that you can relate to in your real life, and that actually gives us a lot of points of access and gives us freedom to interpret and freedom to feel and to put words into what we're feeling. And most of the times, you know, you give us enough that we're spot on kind of like understanding some of those sources. It's a very generous way of bringing abstraction to the public.
Yeah, it's really quite a problem, because on one hand, art is elitist. It is elitist in the sense that it's like philosophy or other sciences. It doesn't mean it's not accessible. It's accessible, but it's not accessible without effort. And so this has always been the balance: how to maintain its level, how to protect the culture, which is represented by its highest points, and at the same time not take it away from access. And as I said, last time I spoke here, I wouldn't waste 5 fucking minutes reading October magazine. I've never read it, and I don't give a fuck about it. And that kind of circular, over-intellectualizing argument that is self-serving and tautologous serves no purpose in my view. I mean, it might be good for exercising the mind, but I'm trying to make something that people can read without reading the magazine first.
Correct. And you sometimes say that that's why you sometimes want to have your paintings to have a feeling that they're unfinished or that there's a problem, to kind of like constantly show that tension, which actually I think it serves both kind of ways of wanting to reach an audience.
Yeah, that's a very good point. When something's perfect, it's in a way dead, because it separates itself from us, because we're such a mess that, I mean, not me, I mean you, but but it's this striving for perfection is not interesting to me at all. When something has personality, when it is something, it's finished, and then it's accessible, because perfection, I don't know where it goes.
Well, we just don't see ourselves in it, probably.
Well, after
As
the
humans.
Renaissance, we reached, in a way, perfection, right? School of Athens, we had perfection. And then after that, then we have to have Tintoretto, who puts a guy there, bigger than Jesus, with his dirty feet in the front of the picture. And I had a huge argument once with a French art historian, which I, of course,
You won.
absolutely. And she said, that shows that the subject matter doesn't matter. That shows that the subject matter does matter. The subject matter always matters, because the guy with the dirty feet is demonstrating that what matters is the people on the street who are not clean, who are not perfect, who are not pure, who are ragged. And that changes the whole meaning of the Last Supper painting. So after you have Leonardo, when this perfect arrangement, then that has to be brought down into something more approachable. And the guy in the bottom right of the painting, the street guy, gives you entry as a person of normal life into the paint. That's the subject. And in a way, that's what I've always tried to do. And that makes my paintings kind of
Straddle both worlds.
yeah, it makes them full of irresolvable energy.
Thank you, Sean. I wanted to open up for questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions. I know there were a lot of questions out there in the gallery spaces. Let me start here, and then I'll go back to you, sir. Yes, and then someone else over here. Steve.
In your entire discussion, okay. In your entire discussion about yourself, you didn't say anything about your childhood. Were you on a farm? Were you in the city? How did it impact your view of nature and the relationship between humanity and nature, if at all?
Well, my childhood was extremely rough. I've been an immigrant twice because, you know, I was born in Dublin just after the war, and Ireland was obviously a broken country, and from colonization, and we were homeless. We literally were living on the street. Then we went to England, where we lived in a number of slums, and this gave me, I suppose, a interesting worldview. And you'll never get me off the street psychologically. You'll never be able to separate me from the workers. And I have tremendous connection with people on the street, and a fearlessness too. I go where I want, and also I can, but it's more of a question of empathy. So I identify with that to an extreme degree. Then on top of that, I think I nurtured something in myself. But you know, I was in a factory when I was 15. So I worked my way out of that. And I suppose that conditions my work also, because if you've been in a factory, you are mechanized. I mean, you can see that in Charlie Chaplin's movie. You are turned into a machine. That's what factory workers are, because you're just doing the same thing all day long. And I was set in type. But because I was set in type, I had a relationship, however extended, with books, because type serves books. And gradually I crawled my way out of this into art. And why I was able to do that, why I was compelled to do that, I cannot answer.
Thank you. Yes, in the back.
We all know that all artists don't create in a vacuum. We talked about influences, your family and music, but I was wondering in terms of artists, what influenced you? For example, you think about music, I see a little Mondrian, like Broadway Boogie Woogie, or I see a little Jasper John, Stars and Stripes in your horizontal vertical lines. Are there any of those influences or other artists that influenced you as you were developing your style?
Yeah, all of them. I went to art school and I took on everybody. And I made work like everybody I liked. I made work like Picasso, I made work like Matisse, Paul Klee. I used to make Paul Klee pastiches. My early influences are, of course, more European. I didn't know so much about American art in the beginning. I knew about European artists. And Mondrian, of course, is a major influence, but so is Malevich, so is Masaccio, so is Monet, and countless others.
Sean, you do describe yourself as a European painter, that you were trained in the European tradition of art and brought that into abstraction, which is something that had not happened in America. I'm paraphrasing you, but you've described yourself more as a European painting and carrying that European tradition into abstraction.
Well, I think that I bring the European tradition into American art. And that's what allowed me to change it. That's what allowed me to change its direction. Because I could paint like, I don't know, Monet. But what I was painting was American. So it's this strange schism. The other thing is that I used to be a portrait drawer, and I can paint figuratively. It's not a problem. I mean, that's like riding a bike. So I would say that I have minimum 50 influences. And I read once, and I'm not going to say who it is, but one artist said, I only have one influence. And I thought, wow. Because if you have one divided by one, you get one. So what you need is, and I have many. And as I said before, Morocco is an influence on me. So my influences are not just in art history. Of course, you take that on. And I was big friends with Robert Ryman. And I think Robert Ryman was just probably the nicest person in the art world. He was incredibly kind to me. And what I learned from him was not formal. Robert Ryman was a jazz musician who comes from the family who built the Ryman Auditorium, which is the old Opry. And he wasn't a trained painter. So he didn't do all color theory like I did, like the Bauhaus. And because he didn't know anything about color, he didn't use it. And that's it. It's just so beautifully honest. So I'm no good with color, so I'm not going to use it. And that one door closed, another one opened.
Right.
So then it was just a question of how it was put down, because it was always white. And from that friendship, older brother, younger brother, I learned a tremendous amount.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. We ran out of time. I'm sorry. Please join us in the museum. We'll walk through the galleries. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone. I want to thank again all our sponsors. Thank you, everyone that made this incredible, great groundbreaking exhibition happen. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sean.